This week in CAD we're going to talk about sketching and design intent. How do we capture what's important in our model when we're laying out the sketch in order to make some features that go into the parts of our CAD model? So for a typical clock, right, what kind of considerations do we want to consider when we're looking at a typical clock? If you look at the clock shown in Onshape here on the right, you'll see that this particular clock actually has 33 different parts associated with it. Each of these numbers is a different part. We've got considerations for all of the ticks around the outside. There's height considerations. There's also considerations for the symmetry and the center locations of all three hands of the clock. So let's take a look at some of the things going on in this sketch. For example, the number sketch. In this sketch, you'll see there's a lot of information included here, and yet there's only two dimensions: the location of the center point of the font and the height of the font. All of the boxes of the text has constraints that are relating it back to the first sketch. Let's see if we can take a look at that. If I look at the number sketch dialog box here, it is showing if it's overdefined, but I can also click on this box to show the constraints. From the Show Constraints view, I see I've got a lot of these boxes that are set up with a horizontal base, so all of the font is read horizontally. I also have these lines that have been a pattern of the first one, so they're all similarly length. And the text is stuck using a coincident constraint to the end of each line. This equal sign is also making sure that the font size is the same on each of the numbers. The pattern tool gives us that 12 locations of the font, so they're equally spaced out. I could change these values. I could make the 4, I could make it 3.5 and bring the numbers closer into the center. I could make it 4.25 and make it out a little bit further. Similarly, I'll turn off the constraints. I can change the font height. I can make it smaller, or I can make it larger. And all of them update together. Without those constraints, there'd be a lot of individual changes that would need to be made. Let's take a look at the hand. When I look at the hand, the minute hand in this case, I see a center line going down the center of this part. There's a location to locate the center minute hand at the same axis of revolution as the hour hand. And let's turn on those constraints to see what else is going on. These constraints here are indicating symmetry, so that both sides of that center line are symmetric. We also have a perpendicular constraint, so we have a nice 90-degree corner down here at the back. We have a lot of symmetry constraints up here at the right end as well. Let's take a look at the marks around the outside of the face. Scroll down to the bottom of the feature tree, we see that there's a sketch 1, which is used to create extrude 6, and that makes the little black tick mark up at the 12 o'clock location. The circular pattern tool is used to keep that same shape and make a pattern 12 times around, so each location has that same shape. Let's see if that's the same way that the little white ticks for the minutes is done. So sketch 6 indicates that these little marks was not created the same way that the previous one was. So this is interesting that there are 60 instances of these little white squares but they're not exactly made with a rectangle tool. They're made with a center line created at a 6-degree angle, and then a line that is perpendicular to a bottom line. Those are symmetric across the centerline tool, and then that feature itself is patterned 60 times. Now manually, those blocks were removed from where they overlapped with the hour locations. So when we do show constraints, we'll see there's a lot of constraints associated with the sketch. Now, if these constraints did not all exist, and we wanted to change the size of that little tick mark, it would be a lot more work. Okay. Notice we're capable of entering units while we're typing. All right. So individual modifications can have big power when you're applying them with design intent. All right, let's take a little bit further look at some of the tools available in that sketcher. And what sort of sketching tools might we need, and what sort of constraints? I'm going to expand my window here so that I can see better all of the tools available on the top ribbon. Notice that how much you see in that top ribbon depends on how large your screen is. So with it expanded out, I have a better view of all of the tools available to me. So for sketching tools, we have lines and rectangles. Center point rectangles are available from the drop down. Okay. Circles along with ellipses. We have several ways of creating arcs. We can create polygons that are either inscribed, I have a circle inscribed in the polygon, or circumscribed. There's splines, points, font, and clearly it was the text that was used to create the numbers here. This is a really powerful tool. It's the project tool, which allows us to use an existing edge from a previous sketch. And our construction tool allows us to create construction geometry or solid geometry. The construction geometry was what was used to create the sketch in the minute hand and the hour hand. The sketch fillet tool allows you to add a nice round into an existing sketch. We've already briefly talked about the trim tool, but we can also split parts and extend them. The offsets will take existing geometry and create a copy that's either inside or outside of it at a given distance, or you can create a slot that follows along the outside of a sketch. We also have sketch tools to create mirrors and patterns and import DXF files. The dimension tool is pretty important. The dimension tool is what we're going to use when we need to add our own dimension values. And then the remaining tools allow us to create constraints to help further refine the sketches. Here we have coincident. I like the shortcut for coincident of being I, because it looks like a point on a line for the letter I. Coincident allows you to take two entities and stick them together. We can have concentric circles. We can have entities be parallel, tangent, horizontal, vertical, perpendicular, equal. You can have a point stick to the midpoint of an existing line or arc. Normal or perpendicular. Pierce. Symmetric. You can fix something, although I really don't recommend using this. And curvature. To be honest, I don't have a lot of work using the curvature tool. So those are some of your constraints available when you're creating a sketch to give them design intent so that as you try to change and update the sketch during your design phase, the design intent will be maintained.